everyone, my name is Rachel Mauchline. I am the Assistant Director of Speech and Debate at Durham Academy in North Carolina, and I'm also a staff writer for Champion Briefs, specifically with Public Forum as well as Big Questions Debate. This is the November-December topic analysis video. If you're watching this, you are most likely debating or just genuinely interested about the November-December topic. Of course, this video, as if you have seen others, is simply a preview to the topic. So if you want more information or would like more argumentation, strategies, and topic analysis, you can always check out the Champion Briefs briefs themselves by buying those on the Champion Briefs website or subscribing to a season-long subscription. This video is, again, a topic analysis on November-December. The topic was released on October 1st, with the topic area being education. So the specific topic being debated is resolved. The United States federal government should forgive all federal student loan debt. This is a topic that is very current. Of course, many of you are like, of course, Rachel, the topic in Public Forum should be a current event. But what sets this topic aside from maybe previous topics you've debated is the personal connection that individuals are going to have to this topic. I myself have student loan debt. Comparative to that of the September-October topic, you are going to have a lot more judges in the back of the room that have some type of a personal connection to the topic. So it's important to keep in mind the potential implicit and explicit bias that individuals have to certain argumentation. Now you might be like, what is the response or solution to that? There necessarily isn't one. It's just important to keep that in mind when crafting your argumentation about what specific populations or populaces of people have or have not done. So just kind of keep that in mind, especially as we delve more into the topic. This presentation is going to be in 4 main components. The first of those is the introduction, which will kind of delve over some of the history of student loans, some of the components to the topic that are just easy to see upon glance. The second component is the strategic considerations to keep in mind. And then the third and the fourth component are looking at potential affirmative and potential negative arguments. But yet again, this is simply a brief analysis, but will help you greatly, especially preparing. There are a wide variety of local, regional, and national tournaments on these topics that will range all the way from Blue Key all the way to the end of the semester for many, or at the end of 2023. With that, let's just delve straight into the topic. As I previously said, many individuals have some form of student loans if they have attended post-secondary colleges. Of course, it's important again to keep in mind that's not universal. If individuals have chosen to attend post-secondary educations, they have kind of had to make a couple of choices. They've either A, chosen to just not attend because of cost, B, they have chosen to attend and have found some way to pay, whether that be through gifts from family members, through getting a job, through scholarships, through Pell Grants, other financial components and financial aid opportunities that are given. And the third is through student loans. Those are the 3 major pathways that kind of relate and connect to this topic. If an individual is currently attending or has attended, student loan debt is something that they either possess or are currently beginning to pay off. This topic is uniquely important because of the timing of it. I think individuals sometimes just hear student loan debt on the news and don't necessarily think what that necessarily means. And that's very interesting, and a reason this topic is going to be so educational for so many. Let's go kind of like to a brief history lesson, nothing too extravagant. The kind of backstory of this is that student loans kind of started, or at least a lot of the evidence is indicative of that it started in 1840. That was when there was the first offering of student loans, and that was at Harvard University. There have been different legislation passes and policy initiatives that have been changed since then. Not to go over too many of them, because a lot of you will be like, this is a lot of history for a debate, topic analysis, but an example of that would be in 1944, the GI Bill passed, which helped veterans get money to go to college. That is still an initiative that's discussed to this day about like access to education. There's also been legislation that's been a lot more recent, such as in 2021 with student loan debt and how there was stimulus packages, and there was also the pandemic forbearance, which meant that no payments or interest accrued and payments were not required during that time. And that was until October 2021, which then got pushed again due to the pandemic. There has also been policy changes more recently, such as in 2022, when President Biden announced that student loan relief for borrowers and doing this piece by piece, including actions in 2023 that was eventually declined by the Supreme Court, and we'll kind of go over those cases more in a moment. But again, that is just some brief bullet points of history, and that's just simply one quick Google search of research. So you might be like, Rachel, I could have done that. Very true, but that is important to give you context. I cannot stress, let me clarify. I stress this a lot on the Arctic topic for many of my students, but when it comes to this specific topic, it is imperative that you have the historical and current knowledge of the topic to be able to contextualize your argumentation. You will have individuals ranging from ages in the back of the room who will only know certain context of it, so if you are the topic expert, which I highly recommend you are in public forum, it will help you greatly. Again, though, 2023 is the time that this topic is coming to fruition. In fact, on October the 4th, which is just a couple of days ago of this recording, President Biden yet again tried to attempt to eliminate student loan debt, another $9 billion attempt. And that is why this topic is so important when the question of uniqueness. For those of you that don't know, uniqueness by definition is simply what is currently happening. What is the status quo? The status quo with this topic is constantly changing. Kind of like what you've just debated with the Arctic, or currently are debating, the Arctic topic keeps moving and changing based on foreign policy and based on diplomacy in the region. This topic is changing based on judicial precedent, but also what actions are being taken by the branches of the federal government. So I would stress highly, and I'm going to talk to you about this more in strategic considerations, that you keep that in mind when creating your argumentation for the topic. You can't just write a case October the 5th, because the topic just came out and be like, want to be ahead of the game, and then plan to take it to the Glenbrooks in November. It might not be the best approach. You definitely need to update your argumentation. That is one important component to keep in mind. Those are kind of the main components of the introduction section of this presentation, kind of keeping in mind that the student loan forgiveness, the intent behind it by the President Biden's administration is to allow individuals to stimulate the economy rather than continue to spend and spend and spend. And that's the motivation behind it. It's a big part of the AF uniqueness that we'll talk about, but that's kind of the motivation and the motive behind it. So kind of the second component to this presentation is the strategic considerations, which I've already mentioned uniqueness, but again, keeping up to date with evidence is going to be super important, because if you are debating someone on whatever circuit or level and they are reading argumentation that is simply untrue based on the historical timeline that is unfolding before us, that is important to keep in mind. With this resolution, I often tell individuals that you should spend a vast amount of time looking at the topic itself and looking at the wording. The wording of the topic is super important always, but specifically in this instance, I broke the topic down by using every word in the topic, with the exception of the word resolved, which resolved can mean a number of things, but often in policy is simply stating a statement of fact or a policy. So I started by looking at the phrase United States federal government. The reason this is specifically important is what I mentioned in the introduction with, obviously, many individuals should know that the United States federal government has three branches, which is the executive, legislative, and judicial branches that keep each other in check throughout. So in July, a good example, and I mentioned this earlier, was the Supreme Court blocked two different cases about student loan forgiveness. Those two cases were the Department of Education versus Brown, and then Biden versus Nebraska. These two court cases are very indicative of this topic being so timely, because the Supreme Court is blocking certain forgiveness measures that President Biden is trying to impose with his office. That has led to actions such as what's happened on October 4th, where we're trying to divert, and President Biden is trying to find other ways that aren't necessarily against that precedent that has now been set, but to try and find ways to give student forgiveness. So why this goes back to the definition is it's important to keep in mind that this is the notion that the United States federal government are a unified front with the three branches working together. Obviously, there'll be arguments that can be made about how certain individuals or certain political parties might not necessarily be on board with certain policy actions, and that's a good component to keep in mind. Again, why the federal government and the United States federal government is so important, because if the Supreme Court says no, or the House or Senate say no, that's an interesting argument that can be taken in mind. The next part of the resolution is the phrase should forgive. Now, I come from a background of both doing policy debate and Lincoln Douglas debate. So when I hear the word should forgive, it is a very interesting conundrum and kind of a component that I think some teams will take advantage of. When I hear should forgive as a policy debater, I am thinking like policy implementation. The USFG should forgive, meaning that they should enact a policy that would forgive. That is one interpretation. The more philosophical LD side of me sees should forgive and sees that as should as a moral obligation, or we have a desire to do so. So it's important that in public forum, when it comes to this specific resolution, that people keep in mind those two perspectives that will come from this. And then also specifically looking at the word forgive with that, the next word that we're going to discuss is the word all, but looking at the range and scale of that forgiveness when it comes to more like an obligation or if it comes to a policy, and kind of making sure that you, as the affirmative team, are able to defend whatever approach you used to take. That is also based on the circuit that you are debating in, so kind of keep that in mind and take that with a grain of salt. As I said, the next word, and the word that made me kind of raise my eyebrows when I read this topic, was the word all. So all, it's kind of hard to have like limited interpretations of the word all, because all is simplicity, everything. So it's important that affirmative teams are aware that they are defending all. I am sure there are going to be many affirmative teams on the circuit that will try and find some way to spike out of defending all student loan debt. I would keep in mind as the negative that you should hold the affirmative to that standard, as that is the wording of the resolution. But all student loan debt is a vast quantity. In fact, as of, let me pull it up, 2012, it was 1 trillion. As of 2021, it was 1.7 trillion. And the number keeps going up and up and up. So just keep that in mind when the resolution specifically says forgive all student loan debt. Question there for cross would be interesting as to if the affirmative defends current students in college, would it be forgiveness and then what happens for the next group of students, especially if you're a high school senior who's choosing a post-secondary option such as college, what would that mean for you? If at the end of the debate, snap of the fingers, you vote AF, does student loan debt get forgiven, but psych, for the next group who have student loan debt, did they have to pay it? What is the AF necessarily defending? Do they have to defend everything? That's another question. You might be like, Rachel, these are a vast amount of questions for this topic analysis, and that is true, because a topic analysis should not just be me lecturing at you every single piece of knowledge on the topic. You will do that research. It is giving you an opportunity to critically think about the topic, and that's what will make you a better debater. The last component of the resolution and the last strategic consideration is that of federal student loan debt. If you type this into Google, which I type it in, it comes up with my federal student loan debt provider. If you type this in, you will see a range of updates that come from updates on payment methods, the amount of debt. Oftentimes, like I would consider this to be like all federal student loan debt, which means debt that has accrued, which comes from federal student loan providers within the United States. That is a good scope to keep in mind, that it doesn't spiral off into like specific scholarships and grants that are separate from that federal student loan debt. Those are the main strategic considerations to kind of keep in mind. Again, not all of them. I've also asked you a couple of questions, so kind of keep that in mind as well. We're going to kind of jump and shift gears now to kind of talk about some of the main argumentation on the topic. I'm going to start by talking about the affirmative, and then I'm going to talk to you about the negative. I'm only really going to give you two main arguments for each of them that will probably be very stock, but give you a number of different ways that you can interpret them. There are lots of pieces of research on this topic. You will not struggle to find research on this topic, whether it be through using Google News, whether it be using Google Scholar, whether it just be using a quick Google search, whatever your scale or knowledge of research practices, you will definitely find some great research. So for the affirmative, I think, as I said before, uniqueness is currently very much flowing to the affirmative. The status quo is that we have a president in office that wants to eliminate student loan debt or forgive student loan debt. So that is going to be very key to how you position the affirmative throughout the debate. The two arguments that I think are the most pressing for the affirmative will be, the first one is going to be about stimulating the economy. If individuals are currently having to pay a monthly payment towards their student loan, they're not putting that money into the economy. That might mean buying a new house, supporting local businesses, or just spending more in general. That might be spending things on Amazon Prime. Who knows? But they're not stimulating the economy because that money's just going to a federal student loan that probably is accruing some significant interest. So it feels like it is just like trying to dig a hole and nothing is working with that. Or dig yourself out of a hole and nothing is working with that. Which means that if we allow federal student loan debt to be forgiven, it would help the economy and give a short-term boost to the economy by stimulating certain areas. The biggest example I would say with this is the housing market, but you could have a couple of different internal links with this or scenarios. You could also be as specific to say, like, this would allow people to use it for medical debt. Like, there are lots of different approaches that can be taken that could come with that. The second argument that I think will be super compelling is supporting the public sector. Currently, individuals, and this is, again, maybe a broad statement, but could be compelled, that individuals are choosing career paths based upon their ability to get paid a certain amount to live. Especially as the price of living goes up, individuals are not choosing jobs in certain sectors, such as the public sector. I would specifically isolate here that this is a really compelling argument about, hey, teachers are currently underpaid in many places. Individuals are not going to the public sector because of the teacher pay, which means it is one, not all, one of the components why there is a teacher shortage. Again, this is not specific to just teachers. You could talk about other public servants, but that is a really good argument that can be made here about how this would allow alternative individuals who might not have previously engaged in the public sector to do so. I would keep in mind, though, there's probably going to be some arguments that are made by the negative about how there are alternative causes for these things, but you could probably make a very compelling link story, especially with teachers when there are going to be a number of educators in some capacity sitting in the back of your debate rounds. Let's kind of flip gears, go to the negative real quick. Have told you I have student loan debt. So I personally don't always think, yes, let's not. But when I think about it through a debater brain, it's always important that you take aside your personal bias. And I think with the negative, there are a variety of very compelling arguments as to why this shouldn't happen. And also, there are arguments that can be made about how there are components of the federal government right now that agree with the negative, which means that it gives you some room on the uniqueness debate, especially when the resolution is saying the USFG. The first kind of argument that comes to mind to me is that it's going to be a question of fairness. And I kind of alluded to this at the end of the strategic considerations component, but what happens to the individuals who have already done payments or paid back their student loans? This is an interesting argument that can be made because is it going to be a universal acceptance? Is it going to be what is that policy or what is that obligation going to look like for the government? The impact of this is that individuals could backlash. That could be physical backlash. That could be backlashing based on voting, a number of different things. I necessarily don't think this is the best impact story, but I think this is probably one of a very compelling argument in a lay round, simply because the judge will hear and be like, that is very true. Like, is it fair that so-and-so who has paid, person A has paid $150 every month for the past 25 years, and then someone who's just graduated from college is getting it completely forgiven? And how is that fair? Fairness is always an impact. We've seen that in some procedural debates, but how is that warranted with this specific topic? The second argument is the taking on of that debt. I think this is very timely based on the discussions we've had. I say we, the United States Congress has had in relations to the budget. I think with the weight of the student loan debt and the weight of our current discussions on the budget, there is definitely going to be some arguments that are made about there is going to have to be trade-off, or the notion that it's not going to be trade-off, it's going to lead to a raise in taxes, or it's going to mean that the U.S. perception to the world is bad because we just keep expanding our debt. When is enough enough? And that's a really big question that's going to be asked of the affirmative. Like, who is forgiving this and how does that work? Because if we take on all of this student loan debt, the 1.7 plus number of student loan debt, what does that mean for the national deficit? And that's a question that I'm very curious how affirmative teams answer that question. Again, though, this is simply a preview presentation. I have given you some ideas, some questions, some things to think about when it comes to this topic. But again, this is not a comprehensive list. There are other individuals who are doing topic analysis. There is a variety of different arguments that will all be available in the champion briefs for November, December. I would highly recommend you consider purchasing them. Again, my name is Rachel Mauchline. I have really enjoyed giving you this introductory topic analysis, and I hope to see you do some great debates this topic. Have a great day.